Well, greetings and welcome to this webcast. My name is Jonathan Foust. It's great to have you here. Somewhat of a different location here. I'm talking to you from Northern California, and I'm going to be introducing in a little bit a conversation with Tracy Budd on deepening practice. In the meantime, a few thank yous and acknowledgments. First of all, a big thank you to Glenn Harrison and Leo Gimo for producing this and getting this to you. Thank you so much. To the Insight Meditation Community of Washington for hosting this. A shout out to my friends at the Unitarian Universalist Church in Arlington. And this wouldn't be complete without a big thank you to Rita Moran, who leads Mindful Movement before this class, and to Ray Manioki, who leads Mindful Dialogue after. If you're interested in the full Monday night experience at 6:30 Eastern Standard Time, you can join Rita for some wonderful mindful movement to prepare you for meditation and the talk. And afterward, you can join Ray for Mindful Dialogue, an opportunity to connect with like-minded people, to share about the talk, share about your practice. You can get those links to the Zoom sessions on my website or on my Facebook page. As well, just to let you know, this is all offered in the spirit of generosity. There's no direct compensation for this offering for Rita, Ray, and myself. If you feel inspired to help make this possible for everyone, thank you so much for your support. It's deeply appreciated. So in the meantime, with our topic being on deepening practice, we'll do a little relaxation, some focus and concentration practice as a way of gathering ourselves to the here and now. So you might like to reach your arms up overhead. Feel free to stretch out in any way that works for you. Just take some time to get the wiggles out. And then as you're ready, let yourself settle into a comfortable position. As you close the eyes, it's helpful just to acknowledge turning your attention from the outer to be more aware, more sensitive to the inner world. Noticing where you feel the breath the most predominant on the inside right now. You might find it helpful to lengthen and deepen and smooth out the breath just for a few rounds. Notice how intimately you can feel the inhale and pause between the inhale and exhale, feeling the breath flowing out. Is it possible to lengthen the breath just a little bit more? And notice how intimately you can feel the breath on the inside. You might find it helpful to focus on the breath being a little bit lengthened, or you might like to now just release the breath completely. Feel your breath free-flowing and effortless. And you might like to explore bringing your attention to just a few points on the inside. First is to feel your forehead smooth, as if you could feel it from the inside. And you may notice as you bring your attention to the forehead smooth, that there might be kind of an inner softening of the muscles around the eyes. Feel the inside of your mouth. And you might relax your tongue. And sense, if you can, from the inside, the volume of your lips. And as you relax and feel, notice that there isn't any subtle spread of relaxation. The jaw softening. Feeling the space inside the mouth. You might bring your attention down deep in the belly. And as you hold your attention here, notice how intimately you can feel the breath down deep in the abdomen, relaxing and feeling. And you might sense how the more intimately you relax deep in the belly, the more intimately you can feel the subtle movement of the breath on the inside. And you might now sense from the inside out the palms, the fingers and thumbs. You feel the soles of the feet and the heels. And from the crown of the head down through the heels, is there anything right now on the inside that could relax or soften or let go? Is there anything that could relax or soften even more? And from this place of relaxation, you might bring your attention to an anchor of your choosing. It might be the breath, just noticing where you feel the breath right now, the most predominant. Or you might explore sounds, or perhaps maybe even the feeling in the palms. How much can you relax right at this point of contact? And how intimately can you feel what's happening right now? And for this next period of time, let this be a time of re arriving. When you notice the mind lost in a thought form, gently escorting your attention back. It can be helpful to remember that as many times as you notice the mind lost in thought, that many times you can notice and re arrive, relaxing, bringing your attention again to the feeling, the experience of your anchor on the inside. And you may notice that when you re-arrive, when you come in contact again with your anchor, you might have a heightened perception of foreground and background, aware in the background of everything that's shifting and changing and moving. And you might, in these remaining minutes, explore from time to time what it's like to broaden or widen your attention, noticing the stream of change, of sounds, sensations, thoughts, different moods, relaxed and alert, here and now, and at the same time allowing. In this practice, there's an element of doing, noting when the mind has wandered and consciously and willfully bringing it back. There's also a practice of being, and you might explore, just in this remaining short period of time, to sense what it means to simply rest in presence, letting the anchor fall away, relaxing even more, noticing what's changing, and exploring what it means to let everything be just as it is. Noticing now the quality of presence. You might again gently lengthen the in breath, softening on the out breath, noticing the sounds around you, the space around you. With your eyes closed, letting your head drift a little bit to the left and right. And taking this time for your transition. You might again reach your arms up overhead, stretching up to the left side, the right side. And welcome back. Joseph Campbell speaks beautifully of the hero's journey and the calling to your life. Classically, you feel the calling and you ignore it for a period of time, and then you realize this is your journey. You have to step on the path. And when you do so, you begin to encounter all kinds of obstacles and challenges. And this becomes the hero's journey. I have really enjoyed my conversations with Tracy Budd a number of years ago when he retired. He felt a really deep calling to deepen his practice, to explore what it was like to do the kind of practices you would do on retreat at home. And he set about in a very measured and conscious way to practice many, many hours a day, every day. And he encountered a lot of obstacles and, as you can imagine, learned a lot. And we can learn a lot from him. And over the last couple interviews we've had, we've talked about some of his insights and some of his challenges, and we kind of continue that discussion here. Well, he'll be talking about some of the most challenging things he encountered in deepening his practice. And he'll also offer some advice for those of us who feel that call to deepen practice as well. And what he encountered, I think, is what we all encounter in life, and we can learn a lot from this conversation. I hope you enjoy it. I certainly did. This is our talk with Tracy Budd. Well, welcome. I am here with yet another conversation. This is a part of a series of conversations with depth practitioners. Here again with Tracy Budd. So many people have responded with comments and wanting more information, really intrigued with the practices that he's done. And I have to say, it's been really quite a journey. So I'm really delighted to have this time to kind of continue our conversation with you, Tracy, and to talk about some of the distinctions that occur when you're doing intensive practice. Most of us are doing what I think of as a maintenance practice, just trying to keep your nostrils above waterline. But you took the occasion last year to do what people would consider monastic or renunciate practices with all kinds of interesting elements. So I'm wondering, before we dive into some of the salient things we can get into here, can you give us kind of an overview of, first of all, what called you, and then the practices you engaged into? And then we'll tease out some of the details as we go through here.
So I guess I should review some of what I did. So basically, I spent about a year doing very intense meditation for 4 hours a day. And that culminated in what one might think of as some awakening experiences that changed my perceptions in quite a few ways. And I guess the reason that I tried to embark on these practices is that I had recently retired and I had time to do more intense practice. And the main reason is that I wanted to get out of suffering. That's, I think, the main reason that anyone pursues these things. And so I think when we last left off, I was in quite the euphoric state that after I had this awakening experience, I was in a state of euphoria for about 5 months.
So,
And
so
it was
let's pause here because I want to hear more
okay.
about euphoria, and then also everything else. So you weren't just doing any random practice for 4 hours a day.
No.
You were following a very specific protocol, a very specific awareness training that
Yes.
can have very, very profound effects. That also
Yes.
requires an absolute like willful training of the mind. So I'm wondering if you could just sort of tell us what was the tradition, what was the practice like, how did the practice, what were the signs of like moving deeper? What were like the indicators that opened up, some euphoria?
Yeah. So I was studying, I guess, Culadasa's method, and I was using, and I guess he had based his techniques on the elephant path, which is kind of a very structured way of going through training the mind that has various stages and sort of, you could almost say, objective measures of whether you have gotten to a certain stage of meditation or not, so that you can figure out what things. It's sort of like I would call it's similar to something like weight training. There's like progressive increase in the difficulty, and you start off with things that are quite, well, relatively easy. And then as you master those techniques, you move on to things that are more and more difficult. And the things that, the things that come about during the practice and sort of indications to me that it was working very well is I was able to develop concentration that was sort of equivalent to what I would do on a week-long silent retreat, but I could just do it in my house without having to be on retreat, which to me meant you were making a very strong container for the mind to be able to develop these things.
So,
And
so
go ahead.
you're a math guy, you're a science guy.
Yep.
So here was the path that said, here are objective measures by which you can measure your progress.
Yes.
So you were pretty much working with the book, is that right? With the Mind Illuminated?
I started with the book and then I got stuck at stage 6, I think, in the book, but I was able to just on my own practice get to that point without really doing anything special, just following along with what was in the book.
So
Then I found a teacher. Go ahead.
you're following the recipe.
Yes, following the recipe.
4 hours a day, you're able to kind of objectively measure the amount of time and the quality of concentration. And then the
Yeah,
concentration went deeper.
yeah, and I had experience with deeper levels of concentration because I'd been on retreats and I've been meditating for a long time. So I have, sort of a sense of what that feels like. And as you get further along in the practice, you're able to turn off your thinking. And, things being able to do things like that is not something that you can ordinarily do when you're just, kind of sitting around meditating. So getting to the point where you can at will turn off your thinking is kind of a more advanced, it's a sign of a more advanced practice. And I guess I'll give a caveat here is that people will sit down and they will start meditating and they'll go, oh, I'm doing it wrong because I'm thinking and there are all these thoughts. It's extremely, extremely difficult to turn off your thoughts. It's like a very, very advanced practice. So it's not something, if you start running, you're not going to run a marathon on your first time you go running. So it's very, very difficult to do that. And it's just a sign of certain training of the mind that can happen. So it's not, yeah, it's not something you would ordinarily, some people can do it, but ordinarily people are not going to be able to do that.
So you're in a willful practice. You're sort of making progress. And for this stage, what was like the hardest thing and what was the best thing about this stage of like intensive willful practice?
I guess the best thing is it looked to me like there was progress being made, like I was getting to places that I had not been to before and experiencing things that were quite extraordinary that I had not experienced before. And so that was, very exciting and sort of a sign to me that, progress was being made. So the downside is very similar to what the upside is, although I did not realize it at the time. The downside is sort of a reinforcement of a striving that is, the mindset that I was in at the time. And, I didn't even really know it so much, but the downside of it is very much that this willfulness of it in a subtle or not so subtle way reinforces a doer or someone that is achieving or whatever that is. So, there's a kind of two sides to that coin.
Oh, that's so interesting, isn't it? That you're touching in
Yeah.
these extraordinary places and then it sparks off greed.
Yes. Or yeah, striving and greed. Sure.
Yeah, just
Desire and greed.
desire, wanting, which then brings in more intensity, more focus, and then also I would imagine getting a little more grim.
Uh,
Maybe that's not the right word.
I don't think I had time to be grim because things progressed very quickly and I was kind of excited about the how quickly things were changing. And anyway, that would be Yeah, they didn't get grim until later, I'll say.
Ah, so it sounds like the graph kind of went like this, and then it went like that.
Yep, yep.
Okay. So, um, then what?
All right, so I had some awakening sorts of experiences, and rather than rehash them, there's other videos that you could probably point to that we've already talked about these things. But fairly extraordinary things happened in my experience.
Well, you
And
know
one,
what, just for the sake of this video, can you share like just one, any particular moment that was kind of a sign of something extraordinary is happening here?
well, I'd say the most objective one, there were various things that were quite subjective, but one of the more objective experiences is I woke up in the middle of the night, and I was in deep concentration when I woke up, and I was seeing a grid pattern of orange and black in my vision, when I wasn't even trying to meditate. So I had visual signs of deep concentration, and I was just sleeping. So I had gotten into a phase where I was essentially going into and out of deep concentration without doing any specific practice. So that would be sort of indicative of that.
When you noticed that, what was how did what was your experience of it? Like, were you alarmed? Were you excited? Were you, um,
No, I was alarmed. And I had a teacher that I talked to about that, and he was like, "Oh, that's like really good sign, like you're like really moving along." And I took that on faith, and it was a sign that I was moving along for sure. So that where I was moving to is not necessarily well, where I thought I was going, let's say that.
so profoundly altered states?
Yes. And
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 with that,
not,
the
yes.
everything that goes with it.
Yeah, and not even just during practice, but at odd times. So it was more a pervasive thing, as opposed to just sitting down, getting my mind into a certain state, and then it's like it took on a sort of a will of its own and was moving forward without any real push to it.
Wow, got it, got it. So what this sort of like sparks, are the caution signs, like the yellow lights flashing, in the middle of the night when you're driving and you come to a dark corner. Can you say a little bit about, because I imagine that progressed, there was euphoria, which we've talked about before, the incredible, again, we've talked about like when the sense of I and mind falls away, there can be both this sense of profound exaltation along with incredible disorientation.
Yeah, so the disorientation did not come till later. So at some point I reached, like I said, I reached a point where I was essentially euphoric for 5 months. And that was after a particular event that I think could be reasonably described as stream entry. I've talked to a number of teachers about this, and there's pretty good consensus that that's what that happened.
So
Although, go ahead.
got to pause here because some of us heard about stream entry. It's a phrase that's kind of used in the literature. Can you say a little bit about like what is stream entry and what is the experience of stream entry?
Uh, do you want the experience of when it happened or what it's like afterwards?
Yes.
Sure. So I when at a certain point in my practice one day, I had the experience of there was just something that just opened in my mind, and it was something I had never experienced before. It was in a category outside of the category of every other thing that there is. There's like everything that you experience, and then there's this, this thing. And so something I knew had happened pretty extraordinary. And at that point, it was interesting because for the next 3 days, I could no longer meditate. Like I couldn't concentrate anymore. I would sit down for my hours of practice and there was no concentration arising. It was just like I had rocks in my head. And then after a few days, I could concentrate again, although my mind was very different than it was before, and it's very difficult to describe how it is different than it was before, but it like my internal experience is very different ever since then. And so I think what you could call stream entry is something changes in your brain and you don't experience things the way you used to anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And there are various things I think that are associated with that. For me, I became euphoric for 5 months. And so I was euphoric for 5 months, and the
So I need to ask a question here. Like,
go ahead.
euphoria for many of us is extremely fleeting.
Right.
It's, there's sort of like the euphoria that comes from getting a new phone, that one lasts for a while. But then,
Yep.
of course, there's the euphoria that comes that's independent of externals.
Yep.
What was it like to feel it extended over months and months and months and months?
It was very weird. I kept saying that over and over again. This is so weird. It was very strange because I wasn't just happy. I was euphoric for months and months. And I was just in a state of extreme joy for a very long period of time. And that it's hard to describe because it's something that I had never experienced before, and it was just I thought I was going to stay in that state for the rest of my life, but I was incorrect.
Okay, so something shifted. So it sounds like you really stabilized at a place of joy. And I'm sure things were coming and going and stuff was happening, but it wasn't, all the fluctuations simply weren't touching the euphoria and the joy that you were feeling because you're living in the
Yep.
world and you're in a relationship and you got neighbors and all that.
Yep.
So how did it begin to shift?
It was quite rapid. uh, so at some point, I developed tinnitus. It was it was about after 5.5 months. And tinnitus, so tinnitus, otherwise called tinnitus. So the medical term is tinnitus, but some people call it tinnitus.
The constant sound. Was it in one ear, both ears?
I had the sound of breaking glass in my left ear, and I had a shimmering after effect when I would hear sound in my left ear. And in my right ear, I could hear like the muscles of my neck and body working, so I could feel the rumbling of that. And I also had an extremely high-pitched tone like that was coming from my head. So I actually talked to various experts on tinnitus, and they said that they had never seen anything like this. There was just like the worst form of tinnitus that they'd ever heard of. And it was horrifying. It was absolutely horrifying. I do not recommend that experience at all.
So much for joy.
Yeah, and the fact, so it was a very so strange this is. So I would actually vacillate back and forth between extreme joy and extreme suffering. So there was a time when I lived near a lake, and I walked down to the lake, and I was standing there and I was looking out at the lake, and all of a sudden the colors became very vibrant, and it seemed like my mind was synchronizing, like with the waves in the lake and the birds flying. And I was like, oh, I'm one. I really felt, oh wow, I am one with all of this. And like 15 minutes later, I was in panic and fear because I thought I was losing my mind. I thought I was becoming schizophrenic. So it was a horrible vacillation between joy and pain, and very difficult to deal with.
Wow. So again, you're abiding with the fluctuations between, bliss and absolute misery.
Yes, and it was very difficult. Not only were the experiences difficult, but it was difficult. There was no one that I could go to that I could say, what's going on,
Right.
And I kind of pieced some things together over time, and it apparently is not uncommon for people to go through these experiences and then have a very difficult time integrating them later, because what it does is it undermines very strongly what you were. So you're no longer that thing, and that has ramifications psychologically that can be very difficult to deal with.
Yeah, my understanding, which could be very deeply flawed, of course, is like that the conditioning is desperate to reassert itself.
Yes, I agree. That's probably true.
And so why sometimes it's described as you have these opening experiences followed by an intense clench. And it
Yeah.
really is like the whole egoic structure desperately trying to assert its dominance again.
Yeah, and I think that's a reasonable description of it. And in some sense, I think that is a function of, like, I really pushed it very hard. And so you could argue that there might have been some backlash against how hard I pushed on that. It's somewhat speculative. I would also say that so from my experience and talking to various people and my own experience, this awakening, if you will, brought out latent trauma that I had inside of me that I didn't even really know was there.
Right.
And it made it very prominent, and I had to deal with it. Like, it was right there in my experience, and there was nothing I could do. Presumably I was suppressing it before and had various psychological mechanisms that were keeping it under wraps. And so, kind of blew the lid off of that. And then it was all out there. And,
Wow.
my whole life became extremely overwhelming, not only due to the sort of unusual experiences I was having, but also because of the trauma that was kind of unleashed and was now in the forefront of my experience.
So you're doing these intensive practices, you have these like breakthroughs into like sustained euphoria. And
Mm-hmm.
then there's this mechanism where, and this is just me reading into it, or like the system is now ready to dump very, very deep trauma.
Yeah, I think that, the way I would think about it, this is speculative. I don't think there's a huge amount of information about this, but so there's one thing is that my psychological defense mechanisms, I would say primarily narcissism, that I had in place were no longer there. And as a result, there was no protection for my internal sort of experience that was being suppressed and manipulated. The other thing is, I was actually listening to a psychiatrist the other day, and he recommended that you ought not to do psychedelics, at least on your own, if you have some form of PTSD, because psychedelics destabilize your mind. And you don't want to do that if you have PTSD, because you might not want to do it anyway, but you must be very cautious about that if you have PTSD, because it will like unleash things and make things very difficult. And I would say that the experience that I have now of life is that I'm sort of always on psychedelics. Like I have, I I talk to various therapists, my own therapist and other people, and it seems like what's going on with me is like I have this sort of reduced sense of self and sort of this more fluid sort of thinking going on that is not, what I'm certainly used to, because I was an engineer and a mathematician and very linearly thinking, and this is not what my experience ever was before.
This is what I find so interesting because you were an engineer, you were a mathematician, you ran a very measured, pretty controlled life. And at the
Yep.
same time, you were aware of early trauma but you were also working it systematically, where you were working different ways to engage with it, to explore what you could learn about it, all that sort of thing. So there are a couple things I really, really want to hear. And
Okay.
again, because we just have like 13 minutes left. The first is moving from an engineer to encountering like this deep trauma. Like what what how did you get through it? Like what was the shift that allowed you to heal it, integrate it, or whatever you want to call it? And then I would like to talk a little bit about this distinction between um, like renunciate practices and lay practices. But first, so what did you do? What were the elements that moved you through it?
Well, first of all, it was a horrific experience. I became completely dysfunctional. I was not able to read. I was not able to watch movies. I became overwhelmed by the smallest things. I think the technical term for what happened to me is I decompensated. And so I sought, professional help. I'm fortunate that I have a friend who is actually an expert in trauma, and he hooked me up with a therapist who is an expert in trauma that works with the military. And so I have like a highly highly efficient person who's very good and very experienced at dealing with trauma. And I started doing EMDR, is what part of that practice was. And the EMDR, the thing I didn't mention about all this is that what happened to me is my brain became hypervigilant. So my adrenaline cranked up, my blood pressure went up. I was having panic attacks every day. I was like in a super amped up mode all the time, and I couldn't get out of it. I couldn't sleep. And so I started doing EMDR, and really on the very first session, it like brought me down a bit out of that amped up state and started to calm down my nervous system. And then, from therapy and doing a lot of Tai Chi and a lot of stretching and a lot of many, many other calming exercises, I managed to get, my nervous system to calm down, because it was absolutely in a panic mode for several months on end.
So you were just in constant state of alarm that you couldn't break the cycle of alarm.
Yep.
And
Yeah, I
can you
was.
say a little bit, because
Go
I
ahead.
know we had talked earlier about the metta practice
Yeah,
and how that became a kind of a practice that you were not very enamored with,
that's right.
to put it mildly, that actually became
Right.
painful.
Yeah. So I was not a big fan of loving kindness practice. I kind of poo-pooed that, because I was all analytical, and I was like, well, you can just develop these techniques and develop your mind and so on and so forth. You didn't need all this loving kindness. Uh, but I most certainly needed loving kindness when I was in the throes of all of this, because I was just in constant distress, and I needed to manifest something to be able to deal with that, to to live with that distress at that time required self-kindness, loving kindness, and it was amazingly powerful. It was amazingly useful to me. It's amazing to me because I didn't, as you mentioned, we've known each other for a long time, and I've always been on the, you don't need that kind of thing. And happy to say I was completely wrong about that. That in fact, that probably would have been helpful prior to what I did in order to soften up the transition a bit, I would say.
Yeah. Yeah. So the practice of loving kindness for yourself, did you find it helpful, like with others? Was that sort of like how did the practice of metta, how did did it change? Just curious as to like the whole felt sense of experience of it, going from like seeing no value to having it actually be integral.
Yeah, so that's sort of a different topic, but I guess my experience of all this is that what I thought I was doing for myself doesn't really help the self at all. And that my sort of experience of things now is that I don't actually get much pleasure out of things on a personal level, and find that most of my joy in life comes from just trying to be kind to other people or also to myself. And that is sort of the only thing that really brings joy at this point, which is kind of weird. Like my interest in other things has gone down dramatically because it just doesn't create the, I don't know. Let me put it this way. So there's one thing, people talk about emptiness and they want to experience emptiness and sort of that thing. And so emptiness to me is sort of like you're watching a movie, and what you notice is that you're watching a movie and looking at a screen. And I notice that most of the time now. So most of the time as a parent that I'm looking at a screen, and it means that you're less interested in what the actors are doing because they're not real. So I don't find the normal things that I would have pursued, like the exciting fun things I would have done. I don't find those so interesting anymore, but I do find joy in in other people having sort of an experience of lightness, or some level of happiness or whatever. But I don't there's much less interest in that personally now. So that's what has the big shift has been. And yeah, it doesn't sound very good, does it?
It sounds amazing. It really sounds amazing because it's the arising, it's bodhicitta, it's like the arising of like the clarity that comes in awareness, and then the cultivation of presence and heart that can hold what's here.
Yeah, and to be clear, I'm not I'm certainly no saint, and it's not like I'm willfully doing something to create the situation where things are different now. They're just different now.
Yeah.
And I'm adapting to what is different now, and that's kind of a big thing. But anyway,
Would you
not
say,
sure if that makes
with
sense.
just a couple minutes left, would you say like, so the euphoria that you felt for those 5 months was profound, but I'm guessing it was inherently unstable.
It was inherently unsatisfactory. So looking back on it, like I wouldn't want to go back to that state. I thought that was the end state and that was the end all be all, but that it's not something I'd want. And so in some sense, like trying to acquire that state or get that is not something that is all that interesting at this point. So anyway.
Oh, interesting. How that worked. I remember my first experience with like of really experiencing the jhanas in a powerful way. You know, like that the first blush is like, I think this is it. You know, I think I'm done. You know, and then you hang out there and you realize the inherent instability of it. You know, that there's something more stable, there's something more vast that's holding this. And
Yeah,
and
that's a very
my
good point.
experience in many ways is very superficial, but you know, as you have given yourself to it fully and going through layers and layers of what is it that's holding this, what a profound journey.
Yeah, that's a very good point. What it is that there's something else that is beyond all of that experiential stuff, and it's more subtle and more stable. It's stable and therefore more satisfying, because the things that are unstable are not, particularly satisfying in the long run.
Exactly. Yeah. So I can go on and on. This stuff really fascinates me, and it's always
I
great
know,
to.
it's really interesting.
But in just the couple minutes we have left, you know, there's many traditions have this distinction in practice between lay practice, the people who are living in the world, and renunciate practice, you know, those who are withdrawn from the world and doing deeper practices. So you are doing renunciate practices. You know, you are doing the practices that are usually reserved for those who are in a community where you're supported, distractions are removed, and you kind of have that inherent support. What would you say to the boys and girls out there who are interested in doing deeper, intensive practice? Like, you know, like any cautionary words, any words of counsel, advice?
Yeah, so that's a very good point about being in a renunciate community. It probably, I'm guessing, would have made my situation much easier, because I would have been surrounded by people who were supportive of what I was going through, and probably there would have been more understanding of it. And so I was lucky in that I am retired. So if this had happened to me when I was working, I would have had to quit. I would have not been able to continue working. It took about a year or so for me to get through this. And, I'd say that I'm maybe not 100% through it, but I'm 90% through. And I had a lot of support. I had therapy and I had a supportive wife. And so I had lots of support. And so if you're going to go down this path, you might, eventually at some point find the ground falling out from under you, and you might not be able to get it back. So so you do need like a certain amount of mental stability in order to function in the world. And so yeah, I would use loving kindness more, maybe not maybe understand that there is potentially destabilization that can occur in the mind, and that you might not be able to back out of that as quickly as you want. So yeah, I would say those things, but in the end,
So
I think it's good.
yeah, so to ensure you've got everyone you need in your lifeboat, like have your support systems lined up.
Yeah, and you really need that. That, like, I was completely dysfunctional. I couldn't do anything. So
Yeah.
you might really need that.
And then be aware of like the element of like pushing too hard. And
Yeah,
and remember loving kindness as part of the lubrication that can really help to support you through the practice.
yeah, that's definitely true.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting. My guru's guru back in the ashram days, who did did very deep practice. He talked about how um like when you're called to deeper practice, that, and this is just what he said, who knows if it's true, but like you actually do call in the support. Like there's something just in the essential inherent nature of things that support will come around you. And I'm glad that proved to be true for you. You know, that you had what you needed to really, create a safe space for you to continue to practice, as challenging and terrifying as it was for you.
Oh, to be clear, I stopped practicing because it was so difficult. So
Which I always feel is like, it's a skillful thing. It's like when you recognize it's too much, and you just say, when the conditions are different, I'm back. But I think that's a skillful move.
yeah, I mean, I feel like I have plenty of whatever it was that I have more than I can handle of what I was looking for. So I need to kind of, you know, learn to understand that and live with that. And yeah, I don't need to push it at this point.
That's great. Well, Tracy, thank you so much for sharing your journey. And one thing I know, I'm assuming this may be occurring as well, is that for people who are doing more intensive practices because of your experience, that you are able to support people who've gone through who are going through what you have gone through.
Yeah, and I hope that so I myself, when I started this, I wasn't aware that things could become so difficult. And so, I'd like people to know that that's a possibility, and that, it can be very difficult. And yeah, there are not many, it's difficult to get support because it's difficult. It's not a common sort of experience or understanding that people have. So
Exactly. I kind of view it as there's like a pyramid, At the bottom of the pyramid is sort of like the spiritual shoppers checking out stress reduction techniques,
yeah,
Then the next level is people of a consistent practice, and then people who do retreats, and then people really connect with Sangha and really narrow their focus. And you kind of move your way up the pyramid. And when you're doing the kind of practices that you're doing, you're in kind of like rarefied air. So for those who are drawn to this, to really find those few people who are able to really support you in a way that they're not coming from it intellectually, they're coming from it with the intellectual understanding, but that experiential knowing. It's so critical.
it's very critical, and I very much did not understand that. And it is extremely critical that you may find yourself in a situation where I thought I was independent, I could go it alone, and that was extremely wrong. I was extremely incorrect.
Wow. Well, I'm so glad you made it through, and I'm so glad that you're there to support other people in their practice.
Yes, thank you, and I hope this is helpful.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Tracy.
Thank you, Jonathan.